get it. We're gonna see if we can get anywhere interesting with the Jupiter key. Yes, if we're lucky, we might find Snake. They were at the end of the hallway lined by individual hospital rooms. The Jupiter symbol was engraved on the keyhole. All right, Junpei, open it, if you please. Yeah, on it. Junpei pulled the Jupiter key out of his pocket and slid it into the keyhole. He twisted. With a nice, sharp click, he felt the door unlock. All right, ready, guys? Junpei's companions nodded. He nodded back, then slowly and quietly opened the door. Inside was exactly what he expected to see from the map of the ship's interior. They were in a tremendous hall, almost like a ballroom, with a massive central staircase. Great, back to the beginning. You sure this is a good idea? What do you mean? Well, we already searched every inch of this room, didn't we? I'm asking you if there's any reason we came back here. Of course there's a reason. Man, sometimes I can't tell if you're smart or just lucky. Huh? This. Junpei pulled two things out of his pockets. The Saturn key card. And the Earth key. Santa cocked his head to one side like an inquisitive bird and looked at them. After several long moments, during which it became apparent that Santa had no idea what the cards meant, Jun took pity on him. Don't you remember, Santa? On C deck, where we are now, there was a big elevator behind the stairs, remember? And next to the elevator, there was a card reader with the Saturn symbol on it. And on A deck, on the door to the left, there was a keyhole with the Earth symbol on it, I think. So the two keys that Junpei has should let us use the elevator and the door on A deck, huh? Yes, that's right. Jun smiled, pleased with herself. So did Santa. All right, I got it. Let's get started then. What do you say we split into two teams? Lotus and I will search the Earth one, so you two can search Saturn, all right? Sounds good. Junpei handed the Earth key to Santa. They decided that their initial search should be brief, only 10 minutes. They'd meet back near the staircase once they were done. Junpei and Jun headed for the elevators. Sure enough, there was a card reader bolted to the wall next to the left elevator. He lined up the Saturn key card and swiped it through the reader. A light on the upper left corner blinked to life. Great, looks like it's working now. All right, now how do I call the elevator? There was a single button to the right of the elevator door. On the button was the upside-down triangle, the universal symbol for down. There didn't appear to be an up button. Junpei pushed it. He didn't have much of a choice. It opened! Look, Junpei! Jun's voice was excited, but Junpei could hear a tinge of anxiety. Sweet, it opened. Let's get going. He grinned at Jun and stepped toward the open door. As he was about to set foot in it, he felt a hand on his arm. Wait. What? I'm not really... I just... Oh gosh. Junpei was at something of a loss. What could she possibly be so frightened of? After a little thought, Junpei decided that she had to be nervous about being locked up in such a small space alone with a boy. In a way, it was kind of cute. Very demure, you could say, he thought. Still, even though it wasn't exactly roomy in the elevator, they weren't going to be pressed up against one another, at least if they didn't have to be. Still, it was making her nervous. Junpei couldn't help but think how innocent she was. Come on, let's go. Again, he stepped toward the elevator, and again he felt himself restrained. I said, wait a minute. Why? Aren't you afraid, Junpei? Afraid of what? Well, I've never... You know... She'd never been in an elevator with a man alone before? Even so, she still seemed awfully alarmed. I might get wet.
What?
Down there. Oh my gosh, I'd get soaking wet.
Well, I mean, of course you would. That's the way it works. I mean, I never heard of anyone getting soaking wet somewhere else.
That's true. You don't mind
Mind what?
getting wet?
Well, I don't know. I think I'd probably, like it.
Gosh, Jumpy, you're so brave.
Really? I mean, I kind of think any guy would do the same thing, Well, what happens, happens, right? If you get the chance, you've just got to go for it. That's what a man's supposed to do, I guess.
You're so cool, Jumpy. I really admire you.
That doesn't really seem like the sort of thing you ought to admire someone for.
I'm really scared.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you've never done it before.
Yes. So I don't think I'll be able to last very long. And then it'll be over.
Over?
Yes. I'll go to heaven.
Heaven?
Feels kind of like you're floating in space. Your mind gets all fuzzy. Like when you pass out. At least, that's what I've heard from people who have experienced it.
Yes, I've heard that too. Although I don't think the same thing happens to guys.
What?
Huh?
But it would happen to men too, wouldn't it? It would happen to anyone. Once it gets into your body, the same thing happens to everyone.
Well, I mean, it usually doesn't go inside the man. I mean, generally.
Yes, it does. Well, eventually it will. It's not like you really have a choice. Oh my god. Your body will force you to swallow some of it, eventually.
What are you trying to do to me?
Nothing. I'm not going to do anything to you. I'm just saying that that's what happens. It's a psychological reaction to what you're experiencing.
Was that really how it happened? It occurred to Junpei that perhaps that was how it worked. Perhaps he'd been mistaken all these years. Had he misunderstood life so gravely? The thought terrified him. Jun seemed to be entirely oblivious to Junpei's mounting confusion and terror.
I know most men probably have larger lungs, but even then I don't think you could hold your breath for 20 or even 10 minutes. Eventually you'd have to breathe, and then the water would get into your lungs. Once that happens, your body won't be able to get oxygen anymore, and you'll start to feel that floaty feeling as you pass out.
Finally, Junpei understood. He understood what Jun was trying to say and why she was so scared. Yeah, you're right. You wouldn't last very long.
See?
She was afraid that the only elevator button pointed down. That meant, of course, that the elevator couldn't go any higher than the floor they were on. As he thought about it, Junpei realized he hadn't been seen elevators on the A or B decks near the central staircase. All of which meant that the elevator could only convey them to the lower decks. And the floor below the one they were on, D deck, should be completely submerged. That meant... Hey, wait a minute. This elevator came up from somewhere under us, right?
Well, yes, I guess it did. It didn't open right away after you pressed the button. There was a motor noise like it was moving, and then it opened.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So take a look inside. Junpei jerked his head toward the interior of the elevator. It's not wet at all, is it? The walls and even the floor are totally dry.
Oh, you're right, they are.
Well, let's test it.
Test it?
Yeah, watch this. Junpei put one foot in the elevator and bent around the corner of the door until he could see the floor buttons. There were only two, E, and C. He pushed the E button and jumped out of the elevator. The door slid shut, and they heard the grinding of the motor as the elevator car moved down. A few moments later, they heard the sound of the elevator door grinding open several floors below. Junpei nodded to June and pressed the elevator button again. A few moments later, the elevator returned. The door slid open, and just as Junpei had expected, there was no water to be found. See? Junpei couldn't resist puffing out his chest just a little bit. June, however, still looked confused. What does that mean? How can the E deck be safe if the D deck is full of water? Well, here's what I think. The elevator shaft and E deck must be watertight and separated from wherever the ship's been punctured. Here, let me show you. He pulled out his notebook and pen and sketched out a rough illustration. I see. So is that why the ship hasn't sunk? The shape of the inside keeps it from all filling with water. Yeah, I think that's what's going on. Junpei continued talking as he closed the notebook and dipped it back into his pocket. So I'm gonna go down and check it out. You stay here, alright? But... Come on, just do it, alright? He gave Jun's shoulder a reassuring squeeze and hopped onto the elevator. He pushed the E button and the door began to close. Jun looked worried, her eyes darting back and forth as if she was trying to make a decision, when suddenly... I'm coming with you! Huh? At the last possible moment, Jun dashed forward, turning sideways just in time to slip through the gap between the closing doors. Junpei jammed his finger against the open button. But it was too late. The door had shut. He and Jun were in the elevator and it was headed down to E deck. He was so surprised by Jun that he didn't even have time to think about what awaited him on the E deck. The elevator stopped and the door slid open. They stepped off onto the floor outside the elevator. Nothing seemed especially unusual. No fish going about their fishy business or jellyfish floating lazily through the water. There was, however, a blowfish, or at least something that looked very much like one. Jun's cheeks were puffed out, and her mouth a tiny, intense frown. Oh, knock it off. It's just like I thought. This part hasn't flooded. Come on, just look around. There's no water here. Jun looked around nervously, then exhaled. You're right, it's not flooded at all. See? But there's a whole lot of water. Yeah, right on top of us. What's going to happen if the ceiling breaks? Junpei thought about that for a moment. Well, we'd probably get really wet up there. Huh? At any rate, we should probably go back as soon as we can, once we're done looking around down here. Lotus and Santa might already be back. Okay, good idea. Junpei glanced around the room they'd found themselves in. The first thing he noticed was a thick set of thick iron bars. They ran the length of the room, separating the left elevator from the right one. Well, we can't go over there. Right. Then perhaps, in the corner of the room that housed the elevators, Junpei found an opening. He walked up to it and stuck his head around the corner. A long, straight hallway stretched out in front of him. That door at the end of the hallway, there's something written on it. Yeah, let's go have a look. Before long, they found themselves in front of the door. On it was a number written in bright red paint. 6. I knew it. This is a numbered door. And indeed, there was a red bolted to the wall right next to the door. Of course, with only 2 people, there wasn't much they could do with it. All right, let's head back. Yes. Junpei and Jun turned and headed back to C deck.
On their way back, Junpei noticed a map on the wall. As it turned out, it was a burnt map of the ship's interior for E-Deck. So you guys found door 1. They met back up with Santa and Lotus, who had explained what they'd found. Apparently, there was another numbered door on A-Deck, just like the one on E-Deck beyond the door that the Earth key opened. According to Santa and Lotus, there was a 1 on the door. All told, they had discovered 2 new doors, the 6 door and the 1 door. It is interesting that E-Deck wasn't flooded. Lotus was quiet for a moment, lost in thought. Well, we don't really know if all of E-Deck is safe. We only checked the area around the elevator. Even so, it's still very interesting. You said the 6th door was there, right? Yes. That means Zero planned all this out, even the sinking. That would have meant some pretty serious remodeling of the ship's interior. It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. Yeah, I wonder how long it took. I can't even imagine how much it must have cost. It would have been a ton, that's for sure. Well, that does go along with what Ace was saying. The most reasonable explanation would be that this was done by some organization with access to a whole lot of cash. Yes, it does make sense. That thought made them all go quiet for a moment. June bit her lip while Lotus sighed softly to herself, and Santa cracked a stiff neck and stared off into the distance at nothing. I don't think it's a very good idea to stay here. June looked up at Junpei with large pleading eyes. Yeah, you're right. Ace and his team might be back already. Well, Junpei and I should be able to open door 1. Huh? You guys leaving me behind? 8 plus 6 plus 5 equals 19. 1 plus 9 equals 10. 1 plus 0 equals 1. Just kidding. Alright, let's go. Lotus's words were all the impetus they needed. Back to the large hospital room they went. The moment they stepped inside, a tremendous voice echoed across the room. Hey, where the hell did you guys go? It was 7. Ace was right behind him, and Clover was behind Ace, although she seemed to be hanging back. It looked as though there was something strange about them. 7 had the look of a man who'd seen a ghost. Ace was just as pale, and Clover looked as though she was only moments from passing out entirely. For a long moment, they simply stood there, looking at one another. Junpei looked around nervously, waiting for someone else to speak. No one did. He looked at 7. What happened? What the hell kind of a question is that? 7 was trying very hard to be angry, but something had shaken him hard. His shoulders were trembling, and his voice was strained. Snake is... 7 couldn't finish. He just looked away, his face twisted by... Junpei wasn't sure what. Instead, Ace spoke. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and spoke. Snake is dead. He died, just as the 9th man did. It was as if all the air had suddenly been sucked out of the room. Junpei felt his heartbeat quicken, and he realized he was having trouble breathing. He could feel cold sweat beading on his forehead and neck. June, Santa, and Lotus looked the way he felt. All 3 were frozen in place, their faces white. Oh my God, that's not true, is it? We should make sure. Yeah, right, we should... They nodded to one another and headed for the number 3 door. Wait, not that way! They stopped short and turned to look at 7. He was pointing at the door with no number. I stuck a screwdriver in there to keep the door from closing all the way. It's not locked, so you can go in that way. Where is he? The shower room on the left side of the hallway. I put a broom in there too to keep the door open. We can get in without going through the numbered door, right? Yeah, that's right. Their new destination clear, Junpei and his companions headed for the door with no number. Once in the hallway, it was easy to spot the metal door on the left wall. It hadn't been opened when they'd been through before. But now, just as Seven had said, there was a broom stuck between the door and the frame, keeping it open. They looked at it for a moment, then stepped inside. Ugh, it smells horrible. Lotus wrinkled her nose and covered her mouth in disgust. Even Santa pinched his nose shut. Yeah, this is pretty awful. I feel like I'm gonna puke. It was just as bad as they said, perhaps worse. A hideous smell filled the air, so thick they could almost taste it. It was sour and smelled of fish, feces, and burnt meat. It worked its way through Junpei's nose and down his throat, to pound against the entrance to his stomach. He put his hands over his mouth and struggled to keep what little was in his stomach where it belonged. They didn't have to wonder where the body was. There was blood everywhere, a few arms of the splatter reaching toward them as they walked in through the door. All one had to do was follow the many radio arms to their source. The body itself was hidden behind a divider. June, you should stay here. But... Please, just do me a favor, okay? All right? He didn't give her a chance to say no. He put his hand on her shoulder as if to shove her into the ground like a tent pole, turned and walked toward the end of the divider. It felt like it took an eternity for him to get there. Santa and Lotus followed, timid and nervous as a pair of children. Eventually, they reached the divider. They looked at one another and nodded, slowly. Junpei put his hands on the divider and peered around the corner. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. He felt his heart collapse in his chest like an empty cigarette carton, and time froze. He knew in that instant that he would take the image before him to the grave. What was left of the body sat in a sea of blood. Chunks of flesh, torn from the body, sat in the blood like tiny islands in a great red sea. A vast, ragged hole had been torn in the torso, and what remained of his intestines spilled out of it like fresh spaghetti. Okay, that's a really nice imagery there. Smaller chunks of meat had splattered against the wall, and some become stuck there as they dried. Globules of yellowish fat had left trails like tiny slugs as gravity pulled them down the wall, even as they dried to it. Just like I said. Santa's voice was strained. Junpei suspected he was holding down some vomit of his own. Just like the ninth man. The detonator in his bracelet set off the bomb in his gut. It looked as though the explosion had been quite powerful. His legs were both bent in an odd, unnatural way, and his left arm had split open, exposing the painfully white bone of his ulna. His bracelet lay next to him. It seemed to have hit the wall hard enough to have shattered the display, which lay on the ground in pieces. Half of his head had simply collapsed. The blood coating almost made it look like a raw pizza dough covered in tomato sauce. His clothes, too, were covered in blood. The burgundy tie, the white shirt, the jacket with the yellow piping, and the gray slacks. They were all familiar to Junpei. No mistake about that, it's Snake. Lotus's voice was unnaturally deep and strained, and Junpei heard it catch in her throat. The squeal of tortured metal made Junpei's teeth curl. It sounded like the noise a ghost would make. No matter how many times he heard it, he never got used to it. Every time it put him on edge. It didn't help that there was a girl nearby who looked far more like a ghost than a living human should. It was Clover. She sat on the edge of the bed, her head drooping listlessly onto her chest. Her eyes were blank and stared across the room at nothing. Her breathing was slow and mechanical. Aside from the rise and fall of her chest, she didn't move. Junpei felt as if even a nudge might cause her to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Snake was probably murdered. Chances are he was killed the same way the ninth man was. Seven lowered his voice, likely in an effort to keep Clover from hearing what he had to say. There were 4 other people in the room with Junpei and Seven: Ace, Santa, Jun, and Lotus. Seven looked at each one of them in turn and continued. It's pretty straightforward. Not that hard to figure out how they did it. First, the killers got Snake to authenticate on the red to open door 3. Then they shoved him into it alone, and waited 9 seconds for the door to shut. Once that door shut, it was over for Snake, but he didn't give up. He probably knew it wouldn't do him any good, but he probably ran into the shower room looking for the dead. It was a small chance, but it wasn't like he had anything to lose. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The detonators only deactivated if everybody who authenticated when they went and uses the dead. And then 81 seconds after he was shoved in, that happened. I see. So that's what you meant by killers, huh? You need at least 3 people to open one of the numbered doors, including Snake. It wouldn't open for Snake and a single killer. Exactly. That means we're looking at multiple perps here. Junpei crossed his arms and grunted. Well, just in case, I want to make sure. Let's say you're right. When do you think Snake was killed? When we all split up to look for the parts for the Reds, I think. Right after that was when we noticed he was gone. But that means none of us have alibis. We were all off searching the rooms we'd been assigned, looking for those parts. Yeah, that means anybody could be a killer. Wait a minute, what are you talking about? Jun seemed shocked. How can you say one of us is a killer so casually? Well, not just one of us, if I'm right. Then at least 2 of us are murderers. Why don't you calm down a bit, 7? What are you going to gain by being so suspicious? That's what Zero wants, you know? What Zero wants? Exactly. This game was set up by Zero, wasn't it? Any game has a winner and a loser. Whoever makes it through door 9 is a winner, and those who don't are the losers. Zero is trying to make us fight against one another for that victory. Then you're saying that Zero is trying to split us up by making us fight each other? Yes. That is why we can't let ourselves fall prey to suspicion. We have to trust one another and form a strong bond of friendship. Otherwise, we'll end up ensnared by Zero's manipulations. Then does that mean that the person who killed Snake... Yes, almost certainly Zero himself. If there's anyone we should doubt, it should be Zero. He masterminded this game and kidnapped all of us. Doesn't it seem reasonable that he would have killed Snake as well? Junpei hadn't really considered that. If Zero had killed Snake, then Zero was on the ship with them. Hey, I'm just wondering about one thing. And what's that? How can you be so sure that Zero's on the ship? Ace's eyebrow shot up. Really, Junpei? I confess I'm a little disappointed. Usually you're rather sharp. Isn't it obvious? Obvious? How so? This ship. Zero said this ship several times when he addressed us. I am Zero, the captain of this ship. The purpose of the game is simple. Leave the ship alive. As you have no doubt surmised, this ship has begun to sink. If we weren't here, he wouldn't say this ship, would he? He'd be saying something like that ship or the ship. Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Ace's explanation made perfect sense. Junpei felt a little foolish that he hadn't seen it himself. Still, he was left with a question, and it was one of no small importance. If Zero's on the ship, where is he? Suddenly, everyone went very quiet. The silence was cold and clammy, and Junpei could feel it crawling across his back and around his throat. Again, he heard the ghosting moaning noise, and moments later, a person who looked more ghost than human appeared. It was Clover. She looked at the floor as she spoke, and her voice was a cold monotone. I think Zero is one of us. Every human body in the room froze. The only sound was the muffled rustling of breath. Eyes darted from face to face. One of those faces
was the face of their jailer. But who? Well, that's possible.
Huh?
Like Clover said, Zero might be one of us.
What are you saying, Jumpy? Didn't you hear what Ace said?
Exactly. I said we shouldn't suspect one another for no reason.
No reason? I've got a great reason.
And what's that?
The bracelets.
He held out his left arm.
Why are the bombs in our bodies connected to the bracelets?
You're all thinking Zero's hiding somewhere, watching us, right? If he's doing that, then he could just detonate the bombs by remote control if someone did something they weren't supposed to. It would be a lot more precise and a lot easier, but if that's the case, then why is the bomb set off by the detonator in the bracelet? You got a point. I'm not done. Try applying the same ideas to the nonary game. All the puzzles here run all by themselves. In other words, Zero doesn't have to be controlling them for the game to move forward. Why is that? Why would Zero bother to do something like that? Junpei left the question hang in the air and looked at the others. It was Santa who answered. So let's say you and Clover are right. Zero's one of us. If that's the case, then it'd be really hard for him to keep track of all of us or control anything remotely. That's why all the puzzles run by themselves. That's what you're getting at, right? Yeah. Junpei nodded. 7. When we were talking earlier, you said any one of us could be Snake's killer, right? Yeah, something like that. Alright then, I've got a question for you, Ace. You said something like, Zero must be the one who killed Snake, right? Yes, something like that. Can't think of any other explanation. So what do we get if we combine those? They fit together pretty well, I think. Something like this. Whoever killed Snake is Zero, and is one of us. 7 and Ace's theories aren't mutually exclusive. They actually complement each other pretty well. At least they do if Zero is one of us. No one spoke. Their faces were grim, but Junpei wasn't sure if they believed him or not. Finally, Lotus spoke up. What were his motives? His motives? Yes, isn't that pretty important? Why would Zero want to hide as one of us? Oh, well, that's because, Junpei choked. He hadn't thought of that, and he had to be honest with himself. He had no idea. I don't know. Lotus sighed. Well, so much for making a persuasive argument, Junpei. In other words, you had only circumstantial evidence. I don't really think that's enough to go on, you know? Junpei was painfully aware of their eyes on him and their disapproval. He tried to find something else, anything else to look at. Just when he felt he could bear it no longer. They heard a bell begin to ring. It was the clock at the central staircase. 3 a.m. That means we have 3 hours left. Then we need to move now. 7, Clover, Junpei. I know how you feel, but you do understand that right now it's important we trust one another, don't you? Junpei couldn't bring himself to respond. He swallowed the words he wanted to say and sighed. 7 and Clover remained similarly silent. Their eyes were looking at something somewhere else, very far away. We must go. We have very little time left. Ace's words put their feet to moving. They all knew where they were going. Their next destination was Mercury. It sat, bolted to the wall near the stairs that led to the casino and the kitchen, between the 2 elevators. The Mercury card reader. Junpei stood in front of it with the Mercury keycard. 7 had given him the card. I found it when we were checking out the shower room. At least, that's what he'd said. Junpei slipped the card through the reader. The light in the reader turned green and made a tiny electronic noise. Now they were ready. Junpei and Jun had been chosen as the investigators. The reasoning being that they had been to E-Deck before, and no one else had. As before, Junpei sent the elevator ahead to make sure the floor they were heading to wasn't flooded. As before, the elevator returned as dry as when it had left. Once it had been checked for water,
Junpei and June stepped into the elevator. There were only 2 floor buttons they could push, the C and bottom buttons. The rest were destroyed or did nothing when pushed. Junpei hit the bottom button. Sometime later, Junpei and June stepped off the deck and onto the bottom deck. They stepped off and saw that the hallway to their right ended somewhere between 20 and 25 feet from them. The hallway in front of them was a dead end, but not a regular dead end. This is a numbered door. This is the 8th one we found. There were 2 numbered doors on B deck near the central staircase. They were doors 4 and 5. There were 3 more numbered doors in the large hospital room, doors 3, 7, and 8. Junpei and June had found another door on E deck, and Lotus and Santa had found a 7th on A deck. There was a 6 on the door on E deck, and a 1 on the door on A deck. 4, 5, 3, 7, 8, 6, 1. And now door 2 stood in front of Junpei. There was only one thing it meant. Do you think the next door we find? Yeah, I think so. The next one's gonna be door 9. Despite himself, Junpei felt excited. There was something about that excitement that frightened him as well. He did his best to put it from his mind and headed back to C deck with June. Alright, let's open these up. The pieces of paper they'd folded up lay on the ground next to Junpei's legs. There were 7 of them, all told. They were written on paper pulled from Junpei's notebook, and each one bore a code name and a door. Why had they decided to vote that way? They decided it wasn't fair to simply ask everyone at once. That would allow people to force others to go through certain doors. Well, that wasn't the only reason. Junpei had proposed the voting system, and he had a plan. It wasn't a plan he wanted anyone catching wind of, however, so he did his best to act calm as he began to open and read the pieces of paper. The first one read, Ace requests door 1. Yes, I do. Would you like me to explain why? No, we don't have the time for that. Sorry, let's keep going. Don't care, old man. He opened the second one. Next to Santa, he wants door 6. Yeah, that's what I wrote. Junpei continued with the 3rd, 4th, and 5th pieces of paper. Clover wants 1. Lotus wants 2. And 7 also wants 2. Wait a minute! There's no way I'm going anywhere with the Elephant Man. No, there'd be no point to the voting if we let people change their choices because of stuff like that. But just give it up, Lotus. It's not like I want to hang out with some exhibitionist grandma. I'm not an exhibitionist. I'm wearing clothes. Barely. So? Last I checked, that's not a crime. Maybe, but what about common decency? Nobody wants to have to look at a chick who looks like a half-naked raisin. I'm going to kill you. Oh, sorry. With some... What the fuck? Junpei, read the rest. Right. Junpei tore his eyes away and looked down at the 6th piece of paper. He opened it. June wants door 6. Yes, I don't really have a reason, I just felt like it. All the papers save Junpei's had been read. He did some quick calculations in his head. People who requested door 1, Ace and Clover. This was the door on A deck near the central staircase. People who requested door 2, 7, and Lotus. This was the door on the bottom deck and could be reached by taking the elevator to the bottom of the ship. People who requested door 6 were Santa and June. This was the door on E deck and could be reached by taking the elevator down near the central staircase down. It took him less than a second to run the numbers. He opened the 7th piece of paper and spoke. Okay, the last one is mine. I want to go through. Okay. Let's see what door Junpei wants to go to next time. Thanks for watching.